Hi, everyone. I'm Michael. We've got Barbara Dawson, Deborah Blackburn, and Kaisa Pace.
Pace now.
Yeah, I knew her as Kaisa
Pace.
something. So we're going to be going over some scenarios that are mostly somewhat hurricane related, somewhat just general topics, and it's meant to be a dialogue to help you. You know, I think some of these we're calling scenarios, but they come from pretty real situations, and we want to go over these, be helpful. So just quick raise of hands. How many people have had their charter business or charters specifically affected by the storms? Yeah, pretty good. You know, I think before we even get into, contracts and money, there's a humanitarian side of this that we have to acknowledge that, there are people really hurting in places like the BVI in St. Martin, and I think there's a lot of good humanitarian work going on with that, and there are some really good yacht-related folks doing stuff, and just encourage you to take a look at that. Also, just as a sort of, what would you call it, we're not lawyers, we're not giving legal advice. Lawyers have been maybe contacted, but again, we're not dispensing legal advice. Don't take it as that. And secondly, really, what's a contract for? If we're all attorneys and Danielle was going to be teaching us about contract law, where'd she go? You'd start with what is the basis of a contract? What's it for? What do you think? What's a contract for? One, spell out the terms, money, where you're going, what all that good stuff. But two, really, and the crux of most contracts, besides the obvious of what you're doing and defining stuff like that, is when it all goes bad. And so that's what we're going to be diving into here a little bit. It's meant to be a dialogue, so ask you to just be kosher, raise your hand, and I'm going to try to keep things moving along. So if I cut you off, I'm not doing it to be rude. I just need to. They got a timer here and it's ticking, so I've got to do that. So we'll start. We'll just jump right into it and get it. The first scenario: Hurricane Irma, issue number one. Charter yacht is damaged or a total loss due to the hurricane, and rendered unable to fulfill charters long past hurricane season. So boat's kind of damaged now, but there are charters in the future. Would all the charters booked be canceled due to force majeure, requiring the owner to pay commissions to all brokers, CA, even if insurance does not cover this type of cost or expense? To what extent do the brokers feel this is a business deal and it is owed, or this is an unusual circumstance and the owner should not have to pay? Why don't we start with you, Barb? What do you think?
Okay. Well, yes. Under this circumstances, if it's a total loss and it cannot be fixed and not fulfill those charters, then yes, it would be a force majeure. Did we agree with that?
We did.
And I would want to see the insurance papers for the boat, and you'd want to make sure of the type of damages that incurred. Those would be the two things you'd want to look at. And then...
Well, that would be assuming that the owner was hesitant to pay the commission.
Correct.
Our commission is due once the charter is booked, period, end of story.
Right.
That is what this scenario is asking. Is our commission still due and payable? And yes, it is. What it goes further to say, though, is do we have sympathy for the owner under the circumstances of what he's been through? Perhaps his insurance would cover payment of those commissions. Exactly. And if it does, and he has been paid that money, he then should not be hesitant to pay our commissions.
Correct. And I think you have to look at the scenario. It's every individual is different. Each owner is going to be different. And I think there needs to be a mutual understanding that their obligations under the contract are pretty clear. There's no change if it's a force majeure during the hurricane or any instance for that matter. So it depends on...
So with that, let's define a couple terms. What is force majeure? Anyone have amoeba contract? Andy?
I've got a nice definition.
Go for it, please.
Well, forgive me. The force majeure in the MEBA contract refers to or includes a clause called civil commotion. The Cambridge Dictionary describes civil commotion as a violent situation in which many people in a public place cause serious damage that basic insurance agreements do not usually pay for.
Okay, so that's kind of one part of force majeure, but you know, the other parts of force majeure generally, and again, I don't know, is it Latin or whatever it comes from? Go ahead.
MEBA contract.
I was just going to grab the contract if you want.
Yeah, well, I'm going to, yeah, please go ahead. I'm going to skim over it, but you know, acts of God is one
That's what I
thing.
was gonna say.
So there's this catastrophic event called a hurricane or an earthquake, or we had a volcano some years ago down in the, you know, there's something that happens that disrupts the normal course of action. And in the follow-up to that is what Deborah's pointing out, there's civil unrest, something's unsafe. There's
acts of war, there's civil unrest, there's, weather can be considered force majeure, but we still have 2 months. This is not a force majeure act. The hurricane itself would not be considered force majeure unless your charter is starting in the next couple of weeks. Then there's a case to be made. To say that when December rolls around, which the majority of these charters would take place, I think you'd be hard pressed to be able to call it force majeure.
Okay. You want to?
Do you want the MEBA definition of force majeure?
Why don't you give us a bit?
In this agreement, force majeure means the cause directly attributed to acts, events, non-happenings, omissions, accidents, or acts of God beyond the reasonable control of the owner, the crew, or the charterer, including but not limited to strikes, lockouts, or other labor disputes, civil commotion, riots, acts of terrorism, blockades, invasions, war, fire, explosion, sabotage, storm, collision, grounding, fog, governmental acts of regulation, contaminated fuel, major mechanical and electrical breakdowns beyond the crew's control, not caused by lack of maintenance to the owner.
Okay, I think Barbara, I'm sorry. You want-
Interestingly enough, too, because we are going into shipyard delays, but it does not cover crew changes or shipyard delays.
In this instant, it might, and only because a majority of the shipyards down there, if you couldn't get your boat up to South Florida, there's
else are you
nowhere to
gonna
put
do?
these boats, and they probably can't get the work done. So that, then, it would probably be coverage. That's to prevent it from an owner throwing a boat in a yard and calling force majeure because he wanted to put $200
So
material.
I think there's a couple of valuable points here. What is force majeure and what's a legitimate force majeure? Number one, on the side of the boat. You know, the boat that, you know, you've all seen the pictures in the video, the 50-meter Benetti laying on its side at Ile de Sol ain't going to be fixed by Christmas. Just not happening. So legitimate force majeure. A boat that, you know, maybe got scratched up a bit in the storm up here, you know, that's not probably a legitimate force majeure of missing a charter that's supposed to start in St. Martin in December. But wow, you know, I'm sure some people in the room are having to deal with that prospect. So
Well, I think
we'll
you
go
did
into
go
the
on the
next
Clark
and we'll go
scenario, too.
into the next scenario. But what is force majeure, how it applies? And I think there's also something that we're going to see here that is really important. Contracts can only say so much and cover so much.
That's right.
And then there's kind of goodwill and reasonableness and a whole bunch of other things that need to come in that often don't when it all starts going bad. So let's go.
Well, one comment there, just to note on goodwill. I think we all know insurance policies don't pay out immediately. There's a lot of time involved in recouping that money and getting it back. So when brokers are coming after their 15% commission, understandably, I think the owner needs a little time to just get his ducks in a row before he starts getting legal notices and stuff like that. Because I think that's one of the hardships for owners is when they're dealing with their loss and then they're getting legal notices or, you know, scathing emails about their commission being paid. It's, you know, I think we all need to work together respectfully and reasonably.
That's not helpful?
It's called communication.
Exactly.
And that's where the CA needs to make sure they're stepping it up and they keep that broker informed of where it is in the situation.
Scenario 2, or the next one. Chartered yacht is booked in a region that's devastated by, let's say, St. Martin. Yacht has been unharmed and is fully functional, maybe up here. Owner fears for the safety of the yacht and crew when he has heard of looting, piracy, etc. Client sorry, charter client still wants to do it, still wants to cruise nearby regions. Is it the owner's responsibility to ensure the charter continues as contracted?
Deborah,
And that is where this definition of civil commotion comes into play. Due to, the owner could cancel the charter due to force majeure based on this civil commotion and the fact that at this very moment, it can't be defined as to whether looting has stopped, whether there is no further civil commotion, whether the yacht, the crew, the guest will all be safe in any environmental, in any area.
Right.
But the owner needs to ensure that the yacht or the area is unsafe for chartering at the time of the charter. And that's what we cannot predict right now. And I think that's where a lot of the gray area is at this moment for all of us. And who are we to say that St. Martin can't be back up and running and functioning, and the prisoners will be back in a jail that will hold them this time? So I think it's still early. I think it's just too early to tell. I don't know what all of you think. I know everybody has been dealing with this. We've all got an opinion about it. But I think the reality is it's just too early.
Yeah. It's a valid point. You wanted to add on something?
well, I think, and the other problem is, I know everybody, that if you're flying in private, it's one thing. If you're coming in commercially, it's a whole nother ballgame, because that's where I'm seeing the problems come in, because the airports aren't quite open. There's travel agents saying, well, I'm sorry that they can't book their flights yet, that they're not honoring those flights. And I've had that told to a couple clients. So everybody just needs to kind of slow down a bit and give some of the airports time to open. I think St. Martin is due to open at the end of October, I believe, beginning of November, is the 10th.
10th of this month?
So that is this month.
Encouraging.
Yeah,
Is
it's
that what
in
they-
6 days. Yeah.
So at that stage, then we should be able to, or something should be able to be done at that point, and we probably know a bit more.
I think the next scenario will help also maybe with this relocation conundrum. So let's just, if it's okay, let's just jump into that. Hey, by the way, if
not help.
if you have a pressing issue or a question as we are in a scenario, of course you do.
Diana?
Tell me, Diana.
My question is, we're talking about the BVI, St. Martin, St. Bart's, those areas that were completely devastated. One thing that I don't know if you're going to touch on, but that's provisioning and being able to get supplies to the yachts, fuel to the yachts. How are these charters going to actually fulfill their obligation to make it a true charter? They're going to be flying everything in. The cost is then borne, an additional cost is then borne onto the charterer. Are you going to be discussing that at all?
No,
Well, no. I mean, but if the airports are opening,
forget it. Yeah, too hard.
that wasn't on our list.
Great point.
But I mean, that is good. I think it goes hand in hand with the airports opening up. Once the airports open up, they have electricity on the islands. They can assess their warehouse damage. I think that'll happen relatively quickly, because they all want our.
Yeah, they're not growing oranges in St.
Yeah.
Martin,
No.
so.
We'll get a
they'll fly
microphone
them
to
in.
you, but could I just make an additional point while the microphone comes? You know, there's something here too that's really important in a room full of, professional people that try to do the right thing, and it's goodwill. So it would seem, again, if I'm the charter captain or owner of a boat sitting up here, I have that St. Martin, or maybe not even St. Martin, maybe Antigua, start, and it's still flaky, we don't know what's going to happen. I think what's being said here is you got to hang on. You got to wait and see. You might not be able to get provisions, but you should do what's right, the right thing, and try to get there and try to get your boat provision. And if you can't, then it's like, hey, here's our situation. Charter manager communicating to charter broker, we're stuck. We don't have fuel, food. How are we going to do a charter here? And then try to figure out an alternate plan is probably the goodwill way, but it's also difficult and complicated when charter clients saying, I want my charter in St. Martin. So,
Not necessarily goodwill either. It's all about negotiations. This is what we do for a living. That's part of our job, is to negotiate the best deal possible for each side.
okay.
Me,
Yes.
my client, you're owner. So And we have to find mutual ground to be able to do that with. But at the same token, you have a fiduciary responsibility
Yeah.
on each end. So we need to do the best we can possibly do. And that may mean telling your client to sit tight for
Okay.
another week or two.
Another question.
The good news is that BWA's office in St. Martin has a full-on provisioning operation, and we will be able to do provisioning
Great plug.
as,
All right.
as always.
Awesome. Awesome. No, very good. Thank you. Anyone from National Marine here to counter that? No, I'm kidding.
Perfect.
And again, we're all, every business has an incredible desire to get back up and running. So, yeah, good points. Okay, next part of this scenario. Owner is still fulfilling the charter, but the charterer fears for his family safety. Alternate areas nearby have been offered with where no damage has occurred, or alternate later dates. The charterer wants their money back because the new area region is not what they had planned. What do you do? Is this purely based on a reasonable discussion case by case? Should we have better coverage in our contracts for this? Kaisa, you want to start?
Response about the contract itself.
Sure.
You don't have to start. We can.
No, I'm
Barbara
happy
always
to.
has something to say.
It's a known fact.
Well, I mean, I think
I'm never lost for words.
this is a little bit of a pickle. I mean, the contract obviously dictates that they're on the hook to take their charter, whether or not it's exactly what they want. But again, it comes down to communication and case by case, I think. If you and the broker can come together and work with your owner and your client to find an amicable solution, that's obviously what we're here to do. So that all parties are walking away happy, or at least getting, what they expect out of it. So as the CA, that would be my take, kind of working with the broker. What does your client want to do? What do we have to do as the owner with our schedule and other pending charters, perhaps?
But let's look at this case where it's the charter saying,
What's illegal?
I'm done. I don't want to do this. What would as representing owners, what would your position be?
Well, if my boat was there and ready to go, and the owners, and again, it comes down to the owner.
Yeah.
They can tell me to stand firm on the contract terms, or they can say, hey, I'm going to be reasonable with this. I totally understand. It happened to me once before, whatever
Right.
it is. So,
But legally, they're bound to honor the contract terms.
right.
So
I think that's
so
our.
it goes
go
both
ahead,
ways for
Deb.
the client
Yeah.
and the owner.
I think her in-house attorney had a comment about that. That
Well,
was good.
what she points out, note that there is no clause in the MEBA charter agreement which allows the charterer to cancel due to force majeure. Therefore, if the owner deems the area safe for cruising and the charterer disagrees, the charterer is liable per clause 11. So it comes down to, again, is the area safe at the time of the charter? The owner says it's going to be, it will be, and that's where he wants it. The charterer says no. That comes back to all of us again. We've got to try to work it out so that they're both happy. But the bottom line is, the charterer is not entitled to get his money back if he doesn't want to go where the boat
Exactly.
is going to be and where the contract reads the charter is taking place.
And on the
Right.
same token of that, if there's nothing going on in the area at the time, your airports are open, your beaches are fine, everybody's cruising around, the owner can't just arbitrarily change the ports, regardless.
Okay. We got to keep moving, but some of the things that you just brought up there, besides the issue of goodwill, the definition of force majeure, is, again, sort of contract 101 stuff. We all might have an opinion about what should be, but it's really important to read the words in the contract and to know, which contract we're dealing with. We'll get into another scenario. And if it really goes bad, where are we going to be fighting this? And how's that going to look, on the legal side of things and
Right.
all that? So just for frame of reference, and I'm assuming everyone's on the same page, we're talking about the MEBA contract, we're talking about the AYCA? The AYCA,
Uninspected and demise contract.
And demise.
Remember, they're all written under different laws. So MEBA is written under British law, and AYCA is written under U.S. law. So how it applies is, I've been told by numerous attorneys, depends on the law it's written, as it's written. So-
Okay, next scenario. I think we're going away from storms here for a minute. So,
Since we're going away from storms, do we want to end any questions that anybody else might have?
we might come back to storms, no?
Okay.
No?
We don't come back to it at all.
No? Done with storms, no more storm questions. Sorry, you're cut off. Go ahead, Patty.
I'm being thrown under the bus here, but collectively, we would like to know, is there any way as an industry that we can somehow, unless this is just too much of a hope and a prayer, work together to have a unified update and presentation to our clients about what is happening in the Caribbean so that broker A isn't saying, oh, the place is decimated, and broker B is going, oh, it's great, go. You know, I mean,
That is all right,
we're getting
That would
such
help.
conflicting information.
Can you get the mic to Bert, or he'll just yell?
I'll make this quick because I think this panel is covering a lot of good points. We have had a weekly call with the IYBA for the last 2 weeks. There'll be another call on next week, Tuesday, that we will give specific information. I have taken notes. I've heard about fuel. I've heard about provisioning. Wearing my IGY hat, I don't want to push the agenda, but the updated information we provide on these calls is specific to that information, exactly what you need to hear, and we will therefore put that on our website. That is one point. I know that there are other areas, but we will at least give you boots on the ground information specific to someone there on the ground describing what they see. And sometimes it'll be good, sometimes it'll be great. That's just my point.
Okay, just so everyone know, Bert spoke for 2 minutes and 36 seconds. We get that added on to the end. Okay.
And just a note, that was, as far as I know, Bert, isn't that extended just to the CPC for right now, or do you want me to open it up?
I'll open it up.
Okay.
The CPC started it, but I will open it up to all. Of course, without my new representation, we are giving factual information in that regard. I will note so to our legal counsel as well, so they know that I don't take it.
It's like that little advertisement at the bottom of the automobile commercials. He always has that. Go ahead.
I just want to do a quick announcement. I'm president of CEBA, Charter Yacht Brokers Association. Our members are very heavily vested in the Virgin Islands.
Yes.
And we're actually doing a recon mission where we're sending out a photographer and a chase boat to go to the various islands to speak with the business owners to get pretty pictures of things that are looking good. And I'm not sure how I'll create a vehicle so we can share that with everybody in the industry.
Great.
And I'll try and figure out how to
And are you focusing on the BVI?
We're focusing on the U.S. and BVI
Okay.
right
Yeah, that
now.
makes
Yeah,
sense.
very good. Thanks. That would be really useful.
One of my local colleagues in St. Bart's pointed out to me today, and it may be on other islands as well, that there's actually live webcams on St. Bart's. And you can see planes taking off from the airport right now. You can see boats in the harbor. You can see the green vegetation coming back. And at the same time, you can see that Nikki Beach no longer exists. Yeah. So I think that's, if your clients are in doubt as to how everything looked, you can certainly send them to maybe some of these live webcams that St. Bart's, some of the other islands might have as well.
Okay, really good. We got to move on, though, and now into more friendly stuff like commissions. Okay.
Brings out the best in people.
Broker A and CA have a contract on a charter contract on a vessel 4 months out. Vessel ends up selling. First installment of the charter was received. Charter was negotiated by the broker and CA with a reduced commission of 2.5%. For whatever reason, side letter written. Once sales negotiations took place, by sales broker, the interpretation by the owner was a commission due based on the sale.
Okay, first and foremost, they're talking about the commission on the charter. And if you read your contracts, if it's amoeba contract, the house that introduced them within that 2-year period is due 1/3 of that commission. So
He's on a different.
No, we're on the,
Yeah, but you jumped to the sales question. There's also the sales
You jumped to scenario.
oh, I'm
That's it.
sorry.
That's why I
Totally
said that
messed
first
with
one.
their heads.
Sorry. That's why
I drank too much coffee, skipping ahead, iPad, nerves. Sorry. Back up.
That's why
Forget what I just
first-
said.
First,
Hold on.
the first house that had the client.
But let me
But he
read the
needs to
scenario.
read the scenario first.
But you don't, we might as well read the first scenario and then go on to the.
Well, that's what he's trying to do.
Okay.
See, I always have something to say.
We've known each other a long time, you can tell. We weren't married. Broker A books client with company X. I hate these. Within 2 years, broker A leaves company X, joins company Z. Broker A books client aboard yacht with company...
Same yacht.
Same yacht, thank you, with company Z within 2 years. Technically, company X should receive commission on that charter, correct? Then, what happens if the client buys said yacht? Would company X or Z get the 15% commission of the gross sales commission? Oh,
Okay.
brother.
So two
So,
questions.
Barbara, now listen to Barbara. Okay.
Okay, I got that too, all right. Yes, company X would get a third of the commission. And again, we were talking about this earlier about how central agents, that is part of a responsibility for a central agent, is that they notice.
A central charter agent.
Central charter agent, yeah.
Yeah, I think
The sales.
aside from being the owner's rep, as the stakeholder of that deal,
Of
you
that
have to be cognizant of the fact that this broker already brought a deal with company X.
Right.
And that company, you don't have to get involved in the battle. I think it basically let A and B know.
Yeah.
And then
And
they
let them
sort
duke it out.
Yeah.
But I think as the stakeholder, you do have that responsibility.
So I think really important point is when a sales deal gets involved with an overlapping charter, really important, sales broker or brokers selling the boat understand there's an outstanding liability, like an unpaid mortgage, like a bunch, charter out there, you guys, you got to deal with this. And then how you deal with it.
And I think you're seeing it happen more and more where the sales brokers are actually, oh, all right, wait a minute, this boat actually has charters and it's going to be liable for those situations. But there have been cases already that have come through the courts that if you were the broker that brought him to the boat, that house is going to be part of the sales commission deal. You can't.
The charter house.
The charter house. You cannot write them out. They actually brought that, and that's what the judges tend to look at too. So yes, company X would be due part of the sales commission. So how that's negotiated, and whether it's 15% is a whole nother deal. That's negotiated.
And what about the charter commission?
Charter commission absolutely would go. The first house would get 5%. The other house would.
Yeah, 1/3 and 2/3.
Yeah, just to cover all the liabilities out there are the outstanding charter and the overlap of the sale. Everybody kind of track on that?
And you know that
Okay.
legally in commissions, while we all work and function on a standard 15%, that's not what the contract reads, so to speak,
In a sales deal?
in a sales deal.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to continue that scenario a little bit.
Charter deal.
So, broker, am I on the right one? Broker A and CA have a
Yeah.
contract for a vessel 4 months out, and the vessel ends up in a contract for sale. First installment is received. Charter was negotiated by the broker and CA with a reduced commission for whatever reason. Side letter written. Once sales negotiations took place by sales broker, the interpretation by the owner was a commission due based on the sale of this 2.5% rather than 15% plus client's refund plus cancellation penalty. Whew. Broker A would have to make a legal claim for the full amount if the agreement was not met. How do charter brokers and CAs better protect themselves in sales situations? You can tell whoever gave the scenario really just made it up. Couldn't have actually happened.
Especially the 2.5%.
Right.
That was-
Okay, not commenting on where the scenario came from, but let's try to take it apart within 3 minutes. I don't know, what's your take, Deb?
Well, because they negotiated a 2.5% commission on the charter, on the sale, they would also get based on 2.5%.
Yeah.
So remember that when you negotiate your commissions.
If you're going to negotiate anything, you need to put it in writing and you need to stipulate for which clauses it applies to. Because it's this blanketed, the minute she did the 2.5%, it blanketed the whole contract. So if you think that person is going to purchase or buy a boat down the line, you need to make sure you cover all your bases.
Again, reading the contract, understanding the clauses, and getting the help you need to actually address what they just said. Probably need a lawyer, but it's...
Besides that, I would fire anybody who signed up for 2.5%.
Well, it's someone probably in this room that you've just embarrassed, so come on.
But, you know.
All right, next
Your
scenario.
own job.
Next scenario, more on commissions here. Whoopee. Charter, booked and check-ins are done by both CA and broker with captain and client. Client seems to be enjoying but little feedback. Charter ends, captain asked by CA and broker for a copy of APA, which was presented to client. No copy given, but responds to client was shown everything and tallied up at the end with a $10,000 gratuity, net nearly 25%. Broker confirms with client that this was in fact true, but wanted to see the APA, which seemed very high. Captain was uncooperative and therefore suspicion set in. Several days after the charter, client made complaints all about the captain via the broker, and eventually this leads to a request for a partial refund. Is quote, customer always right, unquote, even though per the contract no complaint was made during the charter within the 48-hour grace period, plus nearly 25% gratuity was given. There's a question in there.
There's a question.
You want to start, Deb?
The question is the client now due the refund that he's asking for because he's waited so long after that written 48-hour clause that says he's got to either make his complaints during the charter or within 48 hours afterward. Otherwise, the owner is going to be receiving the final balance of the charter fee, and it's done. The question is the client always right? Are we still going to, even though the client didn't follow the letter of the contract, is he still entitled to a refund based on the fact that he wasn't given an APA report? He did have complaints about the client. He did have concerns about the fact that the APA seemed quite high, and this is the question.
So how could it have been averted?
Well, what I try to do as a broker, when I send my client the contract, particularly the MEBA contract to sign, I point the clause out that says, here's what happens if you have concerns during the charter. You must understand this clause and understand that you need to make your complaints during the charter or within 48 hours afterward. So if that is done, we're immediately offsetting the problem. The captains need to be able to provide an APA report. I know they're busy, especially on smaller yachts. They're doing a lot of different jobs, but there are so many accounting programs these days that make it easy. You put the number in and it does the work for you. And I think it's an owner's responsibility to ensure that his captain has that kind of ability to put together a proper APA report that also offsets that problem.
Yeah. Let me interject here, though. Let's say, again, Kais's boat, captain might represent her and the client. And again, legitimately, whatever has happened, the APA report's not there. Would you ever recommend, so charter's ending, the guy seems happy, but could you write something that says, look, it was a good charter, but we haven't received the 48 hours, and we reserve the right to say that we're going to have a complaint because the APA hasn't come within the 48 hours. Because there's a clock ticking here that is really the driver of whether the guy has a legitimate complaint or not, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you all agree, though, that it's the broker's responsibility to make the CA aware within that time? Because once the CA is obligated contractually to send the owner the funds.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is. It's the client's responsibility, first of all, to advise us. And as I'm sure all of you have experienced, sometimes the clients won't say.
No.
They don't want to be the bad guy while they're still there. After they go home, oh, it's a whole different story. But while they're there and they're living with this crew, many times the client won't say anything. Again, why I point out to them from the beginning, you've got to let me know while you're aboard or within 2 days after you leave. I try to check in during the charter. If I get any indication that something is wrong, I will let the CA know and advise them that we may have a problem, and I'll try to get back to them as quickly as possible. But
Again, the implication with the question is that it's an issue with the captain reporting on APA, and the delay is causing this problem that overlaps the time frame of the 48 hours. So again, a way to avoid that. But again, the implication kind of between the lines is captain's either irresponsible, ripping people off, or something that has changed the flavor or the result of how the owner felt. The client felt. Yes, question.
Yes, I'm a little confused by the 48 hours because I don't recall there being a 48-hour window. So the money is due back to the owner. I mean,
It's the complaint clause. It's a 48-hour window, I think, in the complaint clause.
it is.
Yeah. It's in-
It is.
Are we talking
Would you like me to
MEBA?
read it?
Yeah, under
Yeah.
MEBA.
Under MEBA.
But we adapted the AYCA contracts to follow under the MEBA.
And I think it does.
And I think
in
it
that
has a
clause.
complaint, because that was the bigger problem. Over the years, complaints would come in willy-nilly, and we wanted an adequate amount of time to get back to the central agents and to get back to the captain and try to sort out any issues. And the minute that complaint should be issued is the day before they disembark, because otherwise CAs have a tendency to send out the funds.
it's due out upon completion of the charter. So
Right.
there's no 48 hours about it.
It's under the complaint
But the contract does say the complaint within 48 hours.
yeah.
If you've already given
But that
the
may
owner
not
the
be
money,
about
the
the-
owner's just going to have to give money back.
That also may not be about that's more in a term of something wrong with the boat physically. The APA accounts are usually an ongoing battle anyway, because sometimes in the Med, especially with agents and things, sometimes all of the paperwork is not in the accounting. I mean, I just got some accounting back. It was a week after the charter ended.
Yeah.
Because they had to update all the accounting.
Okay, yeah, another question?
From what I heard, so they have 24 hours to voice any complaints before the funds are released. But if there was a complaint during the charter that wasn't resolved on board and before the charter left, they have to say within 48 hours whether that was resolved or not. And they have that 48 hours to hold the funds so that it can be resolved.
Correct.
Okay.
No, it's not 48 hours.
So, you know what?
It's all funds.
I'm going to ask everyone to kind of hang on for a second, because I haven't read the clause, and, not that I know anything, but we kind of are now going into minutia that you'd actually have to read that clause and...
I have part of the complaints clause up. It just says, if a complaint, when the charter is still occurring, cannot be resolved on board, then the charter shall give notice to the owner or the broker within 24 hours of the event or occurrence, unless impracticable due to failure or non-availability of the communications equipment. So.
I'm sorry, it was 24. Okay. This scenario here, though, is after the fact anyway. So, but still, with APA, I've had negotiations go on after the charter period. But it's because you have to stay on top of those APA accounts. As a broker, I always call them up for my APA accounts because I want to see them.
Yeah.
I want to see if there's any questions.
Yeah.
Well, and I think further than this scenario goes on to say that the crew got a very good gratuity, a 25% gratuity.
Right.
So as the CA and the owner's rep, our hands are
There's
kind of
no
tied.
indication of a problem.
24, 48,
Right.
1
Right.
week after the charter ends.
Right.
The funds are gone. The captain wasn't aware of any complaints or issues.
Right.
Buyer's remorse sucks, but
Yeah.
it is what it is,
Go ahead.
I don't know the exact
that's
wording.
a
if
valid
someone
point.
has a
Wouldn't have
MEBA
known.
contract there, but is it not written under the captain's, what his responsibility
Guidelines.
is? Yeah, that he does have to provide an accounting of the APA. And I
Yes.
think it's somewhere in one of those.
That's a
paragraphs.
guideline. That's the problem. It's
Is it in
not,
the
you can't
capital?
hold them to it.
But I think in the contract as well, the
No.
responsibility's there.
Yeah, he does have fiducial responsibility to lay out the
For the money.
expenses. For the money, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think it is important that the broker does advise the client that he should check the accounting with the captain right there and then before he leaves the boat.
I think everyone agrees. That would be the best way, but that's not what happened in that scenario.
And it's just not what normally happens. I have clients all the time disembark boats, and they'll sign it. They'll sign it, and that's always a good indication that they read it. But you know, they'll come back and go, "What was that for?" I was like, "You have to explain to them." That's why it's always good as a broker to call upon those APA accounts yourself.
Before the charter ends.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're gonna have to wrap things up here shortly. Do we have another scenario?
No, I think that was
Okay.
it.
So going back, whether it's hurricane commissions, any of that, if anyone has any other thoughts or questions, you're welcome to say so. Otherwise, we will call it a wrap. Anyone? All right. No, thanks.
No.